My mom is narcissistic and I feel like it's affected how I see myself, but I'm not sure how. Can you explain how narcissistic mothers impact their daughters? I think understanding this better will help me see what our relationship has done to me.
Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is how mothers impact children globally. So whether the mother is narcissistic or not. So our mother is our primary attachment figure. And what that means typically it's the mother, not so much the father. And what that means is when we're born as infants, we depend and rely on our mothers for our understanding of the world and our understanding of ourselves. That mother is what keeps us safe, keeps us fed, helps us understand that the world is a safe place. And when we feel safe, we're able to venture out and kind of become our own person, kind of explore on our own. If we have a narcissistic mother, that attachment will still be our primary attachment. The problem is that connection, that attachment doesn't feel particularly safe. So that lays the groundwork. So you're dependent on existence to someone who isn't particularly safe. And when I say safe, I don't mean, it may mean that they're physically unsafe, but really what I'm talking about is emotionally unsafe. So your narcissistic mother is going to essentially see you as an extension of her instead of as your own independent person. And if you're an extension of someone else, you are going to have to abide by their rules. And these, again, are mostly emotional rules. Of course, there may be real rules, but these are emotional rules. Like, you should like what I like, you should not like what I don't like, you should see things the way I see things. And for a person, they're kind of given that narrative, that script when they're young. As you start to develop and mature, you might start to realize, wait a minute, I don't like the color blue just because mom likes blue. Or I don't want to play piano just because mom likes piano. What happens is you become so used to playing the role and living by the narrative that was set up for you that you start to perhaps become a people pleaser because the love you got, the caring you got, was dependent on how well you followed that script or that narrative that was given to you. So if you like piano and your favorite color is blue, and that's what your mom wants, then you're protected. You're safe, both emotionally and you feel loved. If you don't feel loved. You don't feel accepted. You might even actually get real punishments. And so, one way that it affects grown children of narcissistic parents and younger children, but we usually don't see this until you're an adult child, is your self worth can start to be tied to external validation. So, you were raised to believe that approval and love has to be earned, or it's only given when you're following the rules or the script. So, this can lead to perfectionism, people pleasing, and of course, difficulty setting boundaries because the fear is if you set a boundary, your attachment figure who keeps you safe is no longer going to keep you safe. So, some daughters, and I'm speaking more specifically about daughters because there's a different relationship between sons of narcissistic parents and daughters. Um, but you start to believe that you are unsafe if you're not pleasing that parent. If you're unsafe, it literally becomes a life or death situation, or it feels that way as a child or as an infant. So one is that self-worth is tied to external validation, and that can look like perfectionism and people pleasing. You might also have chronic self-doubt and guilt. So a narcissistic mom might dismiss or distort the child's emotions and perceptions particularly if they don't match her own, which leads the child or the adult child to second guess themselves all the time. So they're so used to being told what to like or what not to like or how they should act or not act that when they have to start making some decisions on their own, they're constantly doubting themselves. So this might look like lots of reassurance seeking, trouble making decisions on your own, second guessing decisions you've made. Another way, and I'm going to go over 6 basic ways. So that's the second way. Another way is hyper awareness to other people's needs and emotions. So, growing up with a mom who is narcissistic means that oftentimes that mom might have been unpredictable emotionally, um, or demanding emotionally, needing and wanting very specific things. And so that leads the person to become hyper vigilant of other people's moods and attention. So their love was dependent on how well they could read the room and figure out, what does mom need from me right now? And so they'll kind of bring that into other relationships in their lives. Number 4, they're going to struggle with boundaries. So again, they probably have weak boundaries because they were never allowed to have their own voice. Their voice was just an extension of their mother's voice. So if mom likes, Asian food, and you say, I don't like Asian food, mom's going to maybe give you the cold shoulder, or mom's going to say, of course you like Asian food. What are you talking about? So they struggle to set a boundary because they're used to having ramifications or consequences if they speak their mind and set a boundary. And that ramification is usually a withdrawal of love or a guilt trip or some sort of power play to regain control. The 5th one is a fear of rejection or abandonment. And so, because their love has felt so conditional, they start to fear that if they're not providing or giving the other person what the other person wants, or if they truly assert themselves or express themselves, they're going to be rejected. And this can show up in friendships, romantic relationships. It can continue to show up in the family of origin, so with mom and dad. It can even show up in work relationships. And then children, adult children, and younger children of narcissistic mothers do tend to have lots of negative self-beliefs and internalized self-criticism. So they've heard a lot of negative messages throughout their life, even if those messages were very subtle. Like I said, of course you love Asian food. You're just making it up. Or you don't know what you like. You're always changing your mind. You never know what really you like. They're going to have internalized all those subtly or not so subtle critical messages and continue them into adulthood. So those are 6 basic things. Of course, there's more. And some of these 6 things overlap with one another. But those are just some ways that a narcissistic mom can impact how an adult child sees themselves.
Great. Sometimes because we have grown up in narcissistic dynamics, we might have a lot of self-doubt about are they really a narcissistic? Is this really what I'm experiencing? So now that you listed out the impact, 6 different ways it impacts their daughters, if someone can identify very strongly, those 4 really, resonate with me, is it normal that you might, if you start, reading about how this stuff impacts you, that that you don't need all of them to apply, and you still,
of course not.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yep. So these are just 6 very broad ways, but you could have one of them, right? So it may just be that you really struggle to set a boundary, really struggle. And not just at work, but also in friendship relationships, romantic relationships. So you may just have one of these, but one of these may be really pervasive in your life and go across all your different environments.
Mm,
And so that can be really challenging. You can have all six of these, and there's more too, I'm sure,
yeah.
um, but have them to a smaller degree. Like maybe you have all six of these, but it only shows up in your dating relationships. Maybe at work you don't have these issues. So these can also be context dependent.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Also, what about the impact of you maybe recognizing some narcissistic traits within yourself? Maybe you learned some unhealthy ways of relating to others and to the world and getting your needs met. Can you talk about that impact? Because, yeah, can you just talk more about that?
So sometimes we don't know what we don't know, meaning we may grow up in a certain environment and think, okay, well, when I want to get something done, or if I want someone to do something and they're not doing it, if I make them feel guilty about it, they'll do it. That may have been effective for you growing up, and you may have modeled that from your parent, your mom or your dad, or someone who's acting in a narcissistic way. And so you might think, oh, this is how people get what they need, is they make other people feel guilty. And so you pick that up as a strategy, and it may not be until adulthood, when you go to college or university, or you're in a work environment, when you start to get feedback or realize, wait a minute, people aren't liking when I do this to them. And if you have enough insight to recognize that, you're already at a great starting place. To recognize that pattern is not particularly helpful or effective. Um, but yeah, you can absolutely notice you've picked up those, I would call them more habits at that point. And the important part is, are you willing to change? And do you have the insight enough to say, where did I get this from? Why am I acting this way? What is it getting me? And how can I do it differently?